No.
So they've done a phenomenal job, and I think the world is in a strange place. And if you have problems, there's a solution for you in Australia.
Absolutely.
But what I don't seem to understand and get around is the cost of living, Bruce. It is through the roof. I don't understand and seem to understand why it's so high.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of it is connected to government spending and government overreach. As we were talking just a few minutes before we came on air, cost of living is dramatic, but the debt in Australia is massive, and particularly around the states. In fact, Victoria's debt is the highest of the states. And whilst a lot of that debt has been accumulated in infrastructure, the cost of actually servicing that debt is so high now that it is impacting on services, which includes health, education, police services, emergency services, and so forth. Now, all these things have to be paid for, which is why the cost of living is so high. And government taxation, particularly property taxes, which have been the golden goose for too long, I think, particularly in Victoria. That at the end of the day, a consumer has to pay for it. Somebody an end user has to pay for it, because a property a developer or such like can't simply subsidise the government. Essentially, at the end of the day, they've got to turn a profit. Now, yes, some people might say they earn way too much. I don't think that they do, for the amount of risk that they put in most cases, and for the capital that they have to employ. But there's no doubt that they can't afford to go into the red, because otherwise their finances actually come down like a ton of bricks on them. So, those taxes that are coming through are all going into the cost of living, and we're paying a very high price for, in some cases, I think almost incompetence, but in a lot of cases, certainly a lack of governance. And we see that with a lot of the CFMEU stuff, the reported $15 billion of money that's basically gone to the underworld, rather than actually being spent on the important things that we all depend on, the services like our health, hospitals, and other services, as well as education and so forth.
So if you want to introduce yourself, Bruce, as well, let me know who you are, what you've done previous.
Okay, well, my name's Bruce Atkinson. I'm actually a former Member of Parliament in Victoria. I spent 47 years in public life, actually, because I had 17 years in local government and then 30 years in the state parliament, Victorian State Parliament. Of that 30 years, I had 8 years as president of the upper house of the Legislative Council. So I've had, significant career in public office, and had the opportunity, I guess, of seeing the struggles of a lot of people as well as the achievements of a lot of people. I'm not sure where some of the topics you might have wanted to discuss today, but one of the key things that I focused on in my time in Parliament and even before in local government was on multiculturalism.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
And it's an area that I am very connected with and a real champion of. I was recently fortunate enough to receive an Australia Day honour. It recognised my service to Parliament and local government. I appreciated that, but I would have liked them to have actually in the citation mentioned multiculturalism, because at this time in Australia, we need champions for multiculturalism.
Correct.
In some ways, not just multiculturalism, because I think that it's great that people celebrate within their own communities, but I also want to see an interculturalism, so that people from the different nationalities, different ethnic communities actually share with one another, and more importantly, share with that Caucasian base, because by sharing their culture more, in other words, for instance, at the moment we've got Ramadan, iftar dinners and so forth. The more Caucasian people, the more people from a Christian background or Hindu background or Buddhist background who could actually share in those iftar dinners and come to understand a little bit more about the Islamic communities, the better our community is, the stronger our community is, the more united our community is going to be. And, when you look at migration, it's under a real challenge at the moment. We've got Pauline Hanson running around and, making all sorts of rash statements. Australia would be in real strife if we didn't have migration. Most of the new businesses that are started in Australia are started by people who come from another country. Now, I guess part of the reason for that is that having made the decision to relocate to Australia, that's the biggest decision of their life. To then start a business is probably easy peasy compared with that major decision that they've made. And I guess there are also some cultural things in terms of whether or not they've been able to get jobs here. So they've said, well, okay, if I can't be assured of getting a job straight away, I'll start a business. They're the backbone of Australia in terms of small business at this time. I heard on one of the radio stations recently people saying, migration's got to stop. All these students who are coming and they study here and then they get residency and then they become Australian citizens. They're causing the housing crisis. They're not causing the housing crisis because the student accommodation is not the same accommodation that Australians want, particularly for families. But more importantly, those students are absolutely critical to Australia going forward. That migration, even through that education path, is so critical to us because as a nation, we're an ageing nation. And there's a cost, a massive cost economically of an ageing population. Who's going to bear that cost? Australian families now maybe, except certainly in some of the Islamic communities and some of the Indian communities in particular, some Mediterraneans still, although not so much, they might have a few children. But most families in Australia today, partly because they leave it late, because they're coping with mortgage and establishment of their lives, are not having children until late.
That's correct.
It ends up that they have one child, maybe two, but for the most part, one child. And that's not replacing our population without migration. And it means that the burden of trying to manage an ageing society and provide the services that people of senior Victorians or senior Australians are going to need really depends on us bringing in those bright, young people who can take up the jobs and who can create that economic activity that supports the services that governments and for that matter, private providers in the medical field and so forth, retirement homes and so forth, really need to provide.
Because there is a lot of division, especially in this time right now. Racism is on its rise again, which we haven't seen in quite a while. And I find it strange because we live in a very, very beautiful country. But this rise of racism is just growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, and I think, there's great things about being connected with the rest of the world. And certainly in the past, people who migrated here were very much looking at setting aside conflicts. I mean, a significant part of our population in the 1950s was, because of World War II and people looking for a better life and making sure that they were getting away from the conflicts and even the ongoing concerns that people had or the divisions that people had in Europe after that World War II. They put aside the problems of overseas and to start a new life here. I think now with our connectedness, with our global community, the social media, the 24-hour news cycle and so forth, people are still plugged in to where they came from as much as where they're here. And I think that in a lot of cases, they're, perhaps bringing some of those conflicts back here that they didn't do in the past. I think there's a lot more of that, and I guess what's happened with the Israeli attacks on Palestine following the atrocities of Hamas have really touched a nerve with a lot of people, because there's the question as to whether or not Israel's response was actually proportionate. Clearly, 1,200 odd people who died in the Hamas attacks is totally unacceptable, and yes, it's a terrorist act. But when you kill 50 or 60,000 people in response, when you absolutely decimate a country, you know, a lot of people are sort of saying, well, you know, was that an appropriate response? Was that just over the top? And so you can understand some of that, the fermenting of disharmony here in Australia, and the sort of protests and so forth that we've seen. Do I support those protests? No, I don't think that they've been constructive. I think that a lot of them have used tactics that have been inappropriate. I certainly don't think reprisals on Israeli businesses and places of faith communities and so forth, the synagogues, has been appropriate. And of course, what we saw in Bondi was just you know, so distressing for all of us.
Yeah, madness.
Yeah. But they were individuals, you know, and the problem is that has fermented a hatred or at least a level of racism, I think, across the board. And so you're right. I think it's on the rise, and that's why we need more people to understand one another, why we need them to share more in an intercultural basis, and why we need to make sure that we recognise the benefits of migration and the extraordinary achievements that migrants have made in Australia. You know, the sort of it really doesn't matter what field you go to. I mean, you go into the hospital system, and all of the people who are involved in that come from so many diverse nationalities, and they're educated people, they're committed and compassionate people. That contribution needs to be recognised, and you know, to sort of say, oh, you know, migrants are a problem, they're causing housing shortages, or they're causing this or causing that. It's a very simplistic and inaccurate picture of the benefits to Australia of migration.
It's very strange because, like you said, I think as leaders, some of these leaders need to get together, whether it's religious leaders, whether it's community leaders, and kind of ask the questions and invite people so they can answer these questions. I remember I had a guest on. Her name was Judith, and she's a credible public speaker who's from the Jewish community, and she just explained to me that we just need to simply ask questions, which we don't.
Exactly.
And that's where we're going wrong. We have all these ideologies, but we're not asking questions. Ask the question. Does it mean this? What does this mean? What's happening here? What is this religion teach? We're very afraid to ask questions.
That's very true. Yeah. And I think one of the problems today is, you know, I was traveling in a train yesterday, and everybody around me is either looking at their phone or they've got headphones on, and they're just totally zoned out to themselves. We've actually shut ourselves down. We're not expanding our relationships with people. We know through the internet people around the world, but we don't know our next door neighbour. You know, we've really come in and closeted ourselves. And in that sense, yes, we're not sharing, we're not asking questions, we're not coming to understand one another, we're not listening to the experiences and perspectives that people have, which are so important to actually us growing as individuals, and certainly to a unity in our communities. You're absolutely right. Judith was right.
Yeah, it's crazy because, you know, I've spoken to multiple people, some people from, for example, the Sudanese community. And, you know, so many people point fingers and, you know, they're criminals. And, you know, but why are we going out and asking the question, what is the problem? You know, I've done it multiple times.
Yep.
And all these youngsters sit around me and they listen to me. You know, what is the problem? They just don't have guidance. You know what I mean? And they're just lost and they're just gone wild. And they just need people that have lived experience to come and sit down with them and tell them, look, I reckon you'll be good at this craft and I reckon you'll be good at this sport. Because they're very talented kids.
They are.
You know?
Yep.
But we're limiting that. I think we're just putting people in groups.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the Sudanese community is a classic example of where we have failed in terms of our response to new migrants. A lot of the people from the Sudanese community have come from, obviously, conflict. They've come from refugee camps. They've come with trauma. And what have we? And a lot of them were rural people, and we dumped them in the suburbs. And we haven't provided the services around them to help them deal with that trauma. The mental illness level in a lot of the women, particularly who've come from Sudan and Somalia, has been very high because they've not been able to process that stress, that trauma. And they've got children that they're trying to bring up, that they're trying to cope with. Sometimes they're broken families. They're not complete because of the circumstances in which they've arrived in Australia. And we haven't, you know, we've brought them here and we've said, hey, terrific, now you've got a great life to live here in Australia, but we haven't really supported it properly. And the result is that some of those younger people have lacked guidance, have lacked support, have lacked, if you like, the disciplines that would have been applicable in their own country, because there were elders and there were people who actually did take them down and sit them down and say, look, you know, this is what you could do. You know, you've got a skill here. This is what you should do.
Because it makes me sad. It makes me very sad. I have a very deep connection with youth because, you know, growing up myself and just to see them lost, committing crime and going to juvenile and then jail, and it's creating a system for them. But some of these kids that actually sit down with are extremely talented.
Exactly.
But there isn't these big leaders around them or these figures that can look up to and say, okay, I'm going to go speak to this man and he's going to kind of motivate me. There's nothing there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think there are some who are trying, and I'm aware of some programs and some people who are doing some really terrific stuff in project. There's one woman, Selba, who's from Malawi, in southeast suburbs around Dandenong, started a basketball club and basically started with a couple of teams, and now it's just exploded in terms of the participation. She's also had a lot of input into the justice system and helping kids and trying to be proactive so that they're on the right path to start with. So, you know, there are people around like Selba who've done some terrific work, but you're right, that it's not being, not everybody's been able to access that. And I think, you know, one of the things that concerns me about some of this youth offending is that people have tried to be, I suppose, fair to the kids, you know, to recognise that they do come from a level of disadvantage in one way or another. And so they have tried to look at a system where, you know, we don't want to lock kids up. We don't want to create criminals for life and so forth. But the big problem is that when somebody has offended, and in sometimes quite vicious offences with the machetes or such like, as we've seen in the past, fortunately that does seem to be subsiding. But where we've seen that, and they're in court, and they're put out on bail straight away. And you've got some that are, and you know, these may be exceptions, but you've got some who've got 50 charges against them, or 50 times they've been let out. That revolving door, not only is it not good for the community and not good and reflects badly on Sudanese people who are doing some great work. Again, they're still salt of the earth Australians, a lot of these people. But they're obviously finding it difficult because of attitudes that are created with what a handful of people in the juvenile justice area are causing. But the other thing is we're not actually even helping those kids, because essentially they go back to the same gang they were with yesterday.
And it's a repeat.
So they repeat. They go back to the same sort of underworld figures who appear to be manipulating some of them and using them to commit crimes to have steal cars, or to particularly the tobacco shop fires and so forth. So these kids are being used by people, but the cycle is not being broken. And we're not doing those kids any favour by sort of turning them back around on bail the next day. We really need to be supporting them differently. We need to be sitting down and understanding their issues, sitting down and really going through it with them and getting to the core of their problems, not simply the bravado where they've been told that it doesn't matter if you commit the crime, you'll be out anyway tomorrow. It's not going to be an impact on your life. I think it is.
Yeah, it's crazy because it all connects with certain stuff, and when we see this, this thing happen and occurrence, and it's just expanding, then racism gets involved.
Yeah,
how do we tackle racism? Because there's no denying that it's on the rise.
I agree, and it's a very difficult thing to combat. Particularly when you have some of the leaders in your community and elected officials who are actually fanning some of that racism with their commentaries, with their inflammatory commentary. It's always interested me that when you look at all of the major faith communities, you boil down their essential core beliefs and they're identical. Whether it's Islamic, whether it's Buddhist, whether it's Hindu, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Jewish, the fundamentals of all of those religions are the same. And yet, there's not enough of the faith community leaders, I think, are doing the bridge work with others. They're not working to reduce some of that inflammatory commentary, to sort of, if you like, dispel some of the ignorance between the different faith communities, which is where a lot of that racism is being generated. Again, there's some people who are doing some great work. I mean, there's an imam at West Heidelberg who has been doing a lot in terms of de-radicalisation of some of the young people who've lost their way, and has really supported so much interfaith activity. So there is some work that's being done, but again, it's not enough. And without even that sort of basic level stuff being done, fighting racism is a major issue. And I don't think any of us really have the answer to it completely.
Yeah, it's something that's definitely on the rise, and it's scary. Whether it's for children, adults, women, multiple cultures or religion, it's scary. And growing up myself, I never used to see this kind of stuff. And then I look back at it now, and I think social media has given it a bit of a platform as well. you know, some of these voices that are coming out. And like I say, this is an incredible country. And, you know, for myself, as you know, someone that's from the Lebanese background, born in Australia, I would die for this country. This country's done incredible things. I would die for the soil of this country. It's taken care of us, my family, and myself, and brought me to this point of my life. And some people, you know, think that I'm not prepared to do that, but I am prepared to do that. And it's sad. And I think it goes back to what I was saying. We need to ask the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, you're not alone in that sort of love of our country as well. You know, I used to say to, I used to start some of my speeches at multicultural events and say, this is not your country. And of course, everybody would sort of sit upright in their seat. And I'd say, this is not my country. This is our country. Mm. And that includes, obviously, the First Nations people, our Indigenous people as well. We are all in this together. And I think that a lot of people don't appreciate just how much migrants contribute, but also how much that they appreciate what, you know, this country is about and are actually, like you said, prepared to literally defend this country and the soil and the obviously the way of life that we have here. I don't think that there are obvious divisions, but those divisions I still don't think run as deep in Australia as they do in some other places around the world. But you know, one of the and I think your point about social media is absolutely correct. You know, it is a window on all sorts of experiences overseas that people look at and have opinions about, and it sort of starts to impact on the way they see things, the way they think about things. Mm-hmm. You know, to me, character is everything in leadership, and I've got a good friend who thinks Trump's pretty good. I can't believe it. You know, I mean, the character of that man, when we talk about racism, he's racist. He's a misogynist. He exaggerates, lies. Everybody knows he lies. Even his greatest supporters know that he's lying.
What I found strange about Trump was in the beginning he said, we're closing all wars. We're starting no more wars. And now here we are, you know, more wars are happening. And it's not really good. I was just reading in the morning that we're going to hit $3 a litre petrol. And we only got 33 days worth of petrol or oil. Or how are we supposed to live? Why are we creating these wars? And it's shaking Australia. It's shaking the world. The world is, I feel like, being held by a thread.
Yeah, it is.
You know? And it's all being controlled by a push of a button of blow up this country, blow up this area, I don't understand. Why can't we just stop killing one another?
Yep.
You know?
I agree. You know, yeah. I mean, Trump is the most dangerous person I think we've seen ever in terms of not just what he does or what he says, which causes problems, but in some ways his behaviour gives permission to other people to act in a way that is, again, impacting on our communities. I mean, as you said, there are a number of wars. Sudan is a classic case. Pakistan and Afghanistan are now fighting. You know, and why is this happening? Because Trump has actually put us in a position where I think everybody is starting to say, well, you know, what opportunities are there for us to actually, I'm not sure where I'm going with this because I'm a bit like you. I'm just absolutely flattened by what he's doing. And, you know, I mean, you're from Lebanon. One of the interesting things to me about Lebanon is that the equivalent of 25% of Lebanon's population are refugees from Syria or Palestine. In Australia, that would equate to more than over 5 million people as refugees in Australia, if you were to look at the equivalents of Lebanon. How would Australia cope with that? Is it any wonder that Lebanon struggles as a state to provide the services, to meet its commitments to its people, to actually develop a strong and viable government? When you've got those sorts of pressures and it's not supported as much as it needs to be by an international community.
It's utterly insane, because like I was talking to you in the beginning, Bruce, people in Australia are struggling.
Yeah.
Economically, mentally, physically, in every aspect. People are struggling to live, week to week with their paychecks, because inflation is so high and cost of living. And now we've got to pay the rise of petrol. People can't afford homes. People can't afford children. And it goes back to what I was describing in the beginning. How will we $980 billion debt? And apparently we're going to reach $1 trillion debt by the end of 2026.
Yep.
How? We're a country with 26 million people.
Yep.
It mind blows me. We're struggling. People are struggling to live.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of that's a big debt. $1 trillion debt is madness.
If you look at the state governments and you look at all of the authorities that they have who are also running up debt, it's considerably more than $1 trillion at a national level.
Because so much minerals, Bruce. This country's full of minerals.
And the country's full of people with talent.
Yeah.
But it's not using that talent.
Taxes through the roof.
Exactly.
It's I don't know where it's going, but it's very, very sad to see a lot of people struggling. I know many households earn $2,000 paychecks and they can't afford children. They can't.
No. Well, the housing market is such that, it's almost impossible.
Oh, for young people, impossible to buy a house.
When I was in that fortunate position of buying a house for about $44,000, I think it was, back in the 1970s, the late 70s. Interest rates went up to 17%. But interest rates of 17% on $40,000 was not a lot. It was a struggle then too, in terms of where we were at. Although, from my point of view, the cost of my house was about 2 times the value of what I was earning. Just me, not my wife. Hers was extra income. Today, okay, it's not 17%. It's only, say, about around 5%. But it's 5% on $1 million.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
And that's 5% of $1 million is a hell of a lot more than 17% of $40,000. And, for most people now, the cost of buying a house can be, 10 times or more their annual salary. How can you possibly cope with that sort of commitment over a long haul? You can do it for a couple of years, perhaps. You can go without. You can, bust a gut to try and save money to actually meet a mortgage like that. But essentially, you can't do it over a longer period. And clearly, that is one of the factors that means that people are deferring having children. So that by the time they get around to really committing themselves to starting a family, they've only got time to have 1 or 2 children. And perhaps that's all they would have envisaged anyway. But the point is that economically there is a constraint now on the fertility of the nation as well.
Yeah, because every household I've asked, they say we can't live on one income. Both have to work. And as I've spoken to some of
and
my
often
kids,
have side hustles as well.
Yeah.
Often are trying to do other things as well as having full-time jobs. Some people working 3 and 4 times.
Yeah, and still can't survive, and they can't afford children. And if they do bring in a child into the world, because both are working, they become disconnected from their child.
Yes.
And then their child becomes separate and has this barrier with their family, and then they go out and seek love from elsewhere, and it creates the whole cycle of
That can happen.
you know, and it's very disappointing because do you feel like where do you feel like Australia's headed? In what direction?
Big question. I think that Australia has got to, I guess one of the real concerns that I have is that so much of the he said, she said in politics, I say it's black, you have to say it's white, because that's, we run a democracy and it's a situation where, we have to interrogate all these issues or laws or such like by adopting different positions or alternate positions. Whereas, in fact, democracy in some ways is a very extravagant form of government because it wastes a lot of good ideas and it pits people against one another when, in fact, a little bit of cohesion would actually make for a much better society. But one of the concerns that I have at the moment is that there's so much focus on detail, on small things, and on trying to criticise, to try and put the boots into somebody. The criticism of, and I was a Liberal Member of Parliament, but the criticism of Penny Wong and Albanese, for Prime Minister Albanese, for not bringing people out with planes out of the Middle East at this stage, for not doing enough to get planes and get those people out. Hey, it's a war airspace. What do you expect? What would you have done? You would have done exactly the same things that they've done. But we have to have the niggle. We have to put the boot in. We have to, whilst we're focusing on some of those issues, we're missing the big stuff. And the big stuff includes the AI that's coming, that's going to wipe out entry-level jobs for kids. We already have a problem where kids can't get houses, as we've just discussed. What happens when they can't get jobs either? How are they going to support them? Is the government going to be able to really support all those people? This is a massive issue. Climate change is a massive issue. And, from my point of view, the Liberal Party is, if at best, a little bit pregnant on climate change. They can't make up their mind whether they really believe in it or not, despite the fact of what you see every night on the news of these natural disasters, which are more frequent and more fierce than they've ever been before. And, that climate change, it's not just about the energy issue. It's about health. It's about respiratory diseases. It's about heat wave deaths. It's about, nutrition. It's about food security. It's about coastal erosion. Housing being impacted, or areas where people live being impacted by bushfires or by floods or such like. It's a massive issue, but we're not really targeting it. All we're talking about is energy. Energy is an important component about it, but the thinking's not there, the broader thinking, the more intellectual approach, the more sophisticated approach to these issues is just not there. And so where is Australia going in the future? Well, I can only hope that a lot of the young people that are coming through are starting to really press for a greater focus on these bigger issues, bigger ticket issues. Not simply in some cases in Australia. I think our governments are basically focused on tomorrow's headline in the newspaper. They're not even focused on what's happening next week. 3-year terms at a federal level is a hopeless situation because they just don't have that longer term view of things. They're not working on those major issues, and we need to do that.
Do you feel like people are losing trust in politicians?
Well, always have. Yeah, politicians, used car salesmen, journalists, they're all down the bottom. I haven't done the car sales, but I've done the journalism and I've done the politics.
It goes to the whole question, how much corruption do you think there is in Australia, or that's unknown?
Look, I'm sure there's corruption, and certainly the CFMEU stuff in the big build projects and some of the generally around property industry demonstrate a significant depth of corruption. But we're still a lucky country compared with a lot of other places. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
without a doubt on that.
there's, and I mean, again, it starts with Trump. I mean, I have never seen a world leader as corrupt, as openly corrupt, as unashamedly corrupt as the current president of the United States, demanding gifts from foreign nations before he'll make decisions, and then making a decision in their favour if he's, you know, fated. It's bizarre.
And the whole Epstein stuff is madness.
The Epstein stuff is tragic. Yes, it's madness. It's tragic. And, you know, it's interesting that in some of the countries, particularly in Europe and obviously the UK, there is significant fallout from it because in those countries they realise the absolute tragedy of that area. But in America, every effort has been made to just cover it up.
That's
Make
really
it,
bad.
Make it go away.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is distraction with war.
Yeah, it's distraction with anything. Yeah, I mean, you know, it just doesn't matter. If there's a story that he doesn't like, he's got to, we've never known in my lifetime anyway, a president of the United States who is front page news every day of the week, you know.
Yeah.
Every day of the week. Because he comes up with something every day of the week. And as you said, quite often it's distraction for some of the things that he's doing to sort of start a bushfire over there. Hey, look over there while I do this, you know.
It's strange, the connections to that man and how powerful Epstein was. And there's definitely something there between Epstein and Trump and that whole, you know, crew and that was in that circle. And it just shows how powerful that individual was, because the cover-ups, the secrets, the files that are hidden, some files get released with names that are covered. And yeah, it just shows how much information that man truly had, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he certainly, at the very least, he seems to have blackmailed a lot of people.
Too much.
And, you know, that's at the root of it. But, you know, whether or not he was also involved in some foreign espionage, that's been debated. But it is an amazing story of how one person could pollute an entire society, really.
What are some things would you say we need to work on in Australia?
I think, as you said earlier, in terms of communities and the rise of racism, increased racism, I think we need to work on the cohesion of our community. I think we need to be looking a lot more at the sort of development projects that we are able to establish, and particularly working off our strengths. I mean, we've got the minerals, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, but essentially we're not processing them here. You know, we're digging up the dirt and sending it overseas.
I recently just discovered that. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
We've got all these minerals, stacked minerals in Australia. We dig it up, then we send it overseas and then rebuy it.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are we doing that for?
Exactly. Yeah. Look, I mean, one of the things that disturbs me is that I think that in Australia we have a bit of a tax lotto mentality. We just want the big prize, but we don't really want to work on a lot of the the effort. We don't want to put in the effort to do it. A lot of our business community is risk averse. We have companies that are growing fat here by buying up other companies, by merging, by, takeovers, rather than looking at opportunities to go overseas and do more in terms of buying or partnering companies overseas in developing new products, new services, export opportunities, and so forth for Australia. So much of what we do is simply try and build up an enterprise and then flog it off for a high price. The amount of foreign ownership of Australian brands, of consumer products and so forth is massive. And from my point of view, I don't think that we should actually be allowing foreign takeovers unless they can meet certain criteria. And that criteria ought to be that they're going to allow us to open extra markets overseas, they're going to bring real innovation here, or they're going to develop new products and services. Because at the moment, some of those takeover companies for overseas, all they're doing is replacing ownership of an Australian enterprise that's paying taxes, that's already employing people, just replacing that with foreign ownership that takes profit overseas and that often reduces the workforce.
Massive example is cars.
Exactly.
The majority of cars that are in Australia now are Chinese cars.
Yep.
What happened to Ford? What happened to all these countries? Why don't we have Australian cars that have been built here to build the foundation of it? We've taken it all away and we just grab these cars from overseas and we sell them here. And then that profit goes back overseas.
Yep. And the interesting thing is when the car industry shut down, we actually lost a whole supply chain. And, now there's obviously discussion, and there particularly was during COVID, of, well, Australia needs to be more self-reliant, so therefore we should rebuild manufacturing. You can't just establish a factory by itself. That factory needs a supply chain. And the problem with us in Australia is that we've lost a lot of the supply chain. We've lost, if you like, the ingredients to whatever the main factory is providing. And, in the car industry that we had in Australia, we were actually contributing a lot of product to the world car. In other words, we were actually making car components and exporting them overseas. Well, as soon as our 3-4 manufacturers closed in Australia progressively, all of the supply chain companies that were that were sustained by their business, but were also able to then leverage that business into exports opportunities, all gone as well.
Because it used to be beautiful to be able to, drive past Ford and see all these cars being built.
Yep.
None of that anymore. It's just all Chinese brands from overseas. And you just sometimes look to yourself and say, it would have been cool to just keep, Ford building and Holden, but it's been eliminated, and thousands of people lost their jobs because of that.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. I think the one that amazes me though too is the industry that concerns me the most is in terms of lost opportunity is pharmaceuticals. I mean, in Melbourne, in Victoria in particular, we have 3 of the major research institutes, medical research institutes in the world. We're in the top 10. And when you read of some of the medical advances, first paragraph is, they've just discovered this for, Alzheimer's, for cancer, for whatever. You read the second paragraph, and an Australian company was involved.
See?
An Australian research institute was involved. We're doing all this smarts. We're paying money for this smarts, and we're doing extraordinary work in our science field. But the whole commercialisation of those ideas, of that research, of those breakthroughs in medicine are being commercialised overseas.
That's madness. That I was actually talking to a researcher who's doing research in diabetes, and I actually had a doctor on in the Royal Melbourne last episode, and we're talking about it. So many incredible researchers nobody knows about. It's not being advertised here. Their work and their efforts isn't being exposed.
Exactly.
And it's been exposed overseas.
Yeah. And they're not paid particularly well. I mean, you can actually have, those when they're doing construction work on the roads and they have somebody there
holding the
lollipop sign, usually a fairly attractive young lady to make sure that the drivers don't get too aggro in terms of being stopped. That person can be earning $150,000 a year. Our scientists, our researchers are not earning anything like that money.
And the work they're doing is insane.
And the work
the discovery,
insane.
The discovery, the research, it blows my mind away. The talent we actually have here, but it's not being exposed.
Exactly.
It goes back to the whole question, as we were talking before. There's actually people that are doing wonderful work in communities for drug and alcohol rehabs, for racism, for extremism, but they're not being exposed. They're not being heard.
No.
Their names aren't on front pages.
No.
Why isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know.
The dedication they're doing is incredible.
Well, it's a shame that they don't play football.
Yeah.
If they played football, they'd be on the front page.
Yeah.
Especially if they broke up with their wife.
Mm.
I mean, hey, where is that news slant? As you said, it ought to be on the good stories. It ought to be on reinforcing people, making people feel better about Australia, making people understand that, again, people from different backgrounds to them, maybe from China, maybe from Pakistan, maybe from Lebanon, are making fantastic contributions to our country, and who are at the forefront of some of those medical discoveries or at the forefront of other innovative areas in business that are good for Australia, that are actually earning export dollars for us. Mm-hmm. Understanding who's actually doing that work.
Mixture of people, different races, different religions.
A diversity of people. And one of the funny things about it too is that very often, we go back, you said about politics and distrust in politics. Do you know, some years ago, there was this story that went around that following some research that was done. And the research asked people what they thought about politicians. And people were extraordinarily negative about politicians. And then they were asked, well, what about your local politician? Oh, he or she are pretty good. They're okay. The point is that there's this attitude of, the sum total. But when they actually get to see somebody up close and understand what that person is doing or what the contribution is of an individual, then they actually become more satisfied, more supportive of those people. And I think that's, that message applies across the board.
Because there is a big hatred towards politicians.
Oh, yeah.
Massive.
Well, some of it's own goal.
Yeah. And I think some of these politicians are contributing well. They're doing an incredible job, but there's still hatred towards them. And I can never seem to understand why. I think it's multiple factors. And I think it's a little bit on what he explained and touched on. They're not really up and close to these people and asking the right questions.
Yep. And they're also not necessarily focusing on the issues that people expect them to be focusing on.
Correct. That's why there's the hatred.
They get up and they do the spin. They won't answer the questions directly. They do the spin. And they're focused on the things that they want to tell people rather than the things that people want to hear. And if there's that disconnect, then, obviously you're not going to have an admiration of the work they do.
It's true. They're not focusing on the real issues that the Australians are facing.
No.
Terrible issues. I seen a video clip of in the chamber where they're asking the question of why have we sent $50 million to a certain country. I can't remember what it was. When people are struggling here, we need the money here. We have a drug and we have an addiction problem. We have a homeless problem. We have a housing problem. Why are we sending money overseas when we need it here? You know, people are struggling. Yep. People are struggling to live.
Yep. So, sometimes that can be justified in terms of what it depends what the outcome is. But and you know, one of the key issues I think is that you can sometimes gain more experience, more knowledge, different perspectives on how to address some of the immediate problems here by stepping outside the bubble and looking broader.
Okay.
And perhaps investing in some other activity. But I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of money that's wasted when in fact we have some very serious issues, some very serious problems. I mean, the drug problem to me is, apart from anything else, I think that a lot of people are actually just anaesthetizing themselves against their lives, against what they see as lives that are going nowhere or that have significant hurdles, significant problems, and their way of dealing with those problems is just to self-medicate with drugs, with alcohol, maybe with gambling.
Yeah.
We need to be getting back and helping people.
Do you feel like the tax system needs to be reconstructed?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, dramatically. When Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, he commissioned a review of taxation in Australia, and a guy called Henry did that review. Now, Henry had been a significant federal bureaucrat, understood the tax system better than probably anybody in Australia, had a real helicopter view of all of our taxation. He made over 200 recommendations. Rudd picked up, I think it was 3 or 4 of them. A couple of them ended in disaster. One of them was an extra tax on the mining industry, and the mining industry mounted a massive campaign against him, so that one died. He had one that was partly implemented in terms of superannuation. But essentially, 200 recommendations are on the shelf gathering dust from somebody who actually did understand the interaction of the different taxes and their various impacts, and how one would really impact on our productivity or on, our livability, if you like. There was tremendous opportunities there. Not one government's been prepared to go back and touch that since. One of the interesting things about, and this is in defence, if you like, of the state governments, we'll use simple figures rather than, the billions. But if the state government wants to spend $100 million on building a road, essentially it gets the benefit, obviously, of people driving on the road. But in terms of taxation return, it gets very little back for that $100 million. It gets a little bit of stamp duty, a bit of payroll tax.
Why is that?
Because essentially it doesn't have an opportunity of taxation that gets the return from that capital expenditure. But the federal government does. The federal government gets company tax. The federal government gets GST. Yes, that eventually comes back to, carved up amongst the states. But essentially, it also gets personal income tax. So all the big and efficient taxation is with the federal government. And on a big build project, for instance, the federal government actually rakes in the money on that project while the state government's outlaid all the money on that project. And there's not that balance. That's an issue that's not really been tackled at all. There is a need, a urgent need to tackle tax reform.
Because the more you make, the more you get taxed.
Exactly.
No word of a lie. I spoke to about 5, 6 different people that actually have businesses and were expanding. Then they went, they not shut down the company, but really made it to a smaller size, because the more they expanded, the more tax they paid.
Yeah.
So it wasn't worth it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's that's particularly a case with something like payroll tax, which is punitive on employing people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Companies are, or individuals are, not expanding, not creating the opportunities that come with bigger and particularly efficient businesses, because the taxation system can be punitive for some of those people.
Too high. High. It's madness, the amount of tax you have to pay.
Yep.
And then you pay your tax, then you pay your bills, and then at the end of the week you look in your bank account and you got about $300.
Yeah.
And then if you decide to take your partner out for dinner, you're paying $200 because everything is so expensive.
Yeah. That's absolutely right.
They recently, took, obviously some of the CEOs to court from Coles, where they found that they were rising prices of certain groceries. More robbery. How do you expect us to live?
No, that's exactly right. And it's interesting. I mean, we're in Victoria Street and in Richmond or Abbotsford now, and driving down the street here, you look at the graffiti, you look at the number of vacant shops,
just empty.
And I could go down to Bridge Road, or I could go to virtually any shopping centre. In fact, when I'm driving through shopping centres, I look and I just shake my head at the vacant shops. The number of small businesses that are closing is just horrific. And every one of those is not just a job, not just a lost opportunity in terms of the actual business place of business, but also in many cases, people who've had to put their house on the line or their assets on the line to get a loan to start the business in the first place.
Yep.
So they're not just, it's not a zero-sum game where they simply close the shop and walk away. There's often a tale of debt related to the business that they had to close. And the number of insolvencies is up dramatically at the moment. Comparable with what we saw in the worst days of COVID. This is a real issue for Australia at the moment.
And it's rising. As I drive down this road, I look at, as you said, the graffiti, the empty shops. Me and my mate were driving past last time because he hasn't been in a while, and he's like, it's like a ghost town.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's a ghost town. Why aren't we investing into these businesses, helping them, saving their businesses, creating constructive ideas for these businesses? And I think that's where a lot of the people are really having hate towards the government.
Yeah.
Because like we said in the beginning, the real issues aren't being tackled.
No.
They're not being tackled.
Yeah.
The media is too busy covering people about people from the overseas. When I was, the whole tobacco wars. Why do we care about that?
Yeah.
We need to talk about real issues that the Australians are facing on a day-to-day basis. The healthcare system. Yep. The amount of pressure some of these doctors are under, some of these nurses are under. The paramedics. I could not believe the wage a paramedic gets, the amount of pressure they're on.
Absolutely.
It's madness.
Yeah.
You go to hospital, you're waiting for 9 to 10 hours. People get angry, frustrated, but you can't. The doctors they're limited. They're doing the best they can.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And in fact,
madness.
In the hospital, some of the doctors.
Can we check how much a wage is for a paramedic?
And they're dealing with trauma one after the other. They don't even have time to de-process
It's one after
what they're
another.
going through.
It's one after another. You know these figures, but then they're paying tax and, look, a graduate's 90,000, 16,000. How do you survive on that?
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. Yeah.
And then some people that are working in the construction industry, they're getting 150 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
the healthcare system needs support. I don't know what it needs, but it needs support. And it's so sad to see it the way it is, because some of these doctors, they're really under pressure. These nurses.
Yep. Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, you even look at situation with, again, you might talk about politicians and whether or not we get our value for money, but you look at what politicians are being paid and you look at what some of these young 18-year-olds who are pretty good with a kick in a football, the amount of money they get.
Mm-hmm.
And then the amount of money a teacher gets.
Oh, that's another whole...
Or a nurse gets.
That's another whole topic, teachers.
It's completely out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you get about correcting that. And
90,000.
Yeah.
For some of these teachers.
Yeah.
How do you survive with that?
Well, these days, very difficult. And certainly, as you said, if you're a single family, you can't.
It's impossible.
If you've just got that one wage coming in, and you've got any children, you can't.
I really, really hope that some of these issues really get tackled and they start really looking at the important stuff. I truly believe what a true leader is a leader that actually walks into these communities and sees for himself. I think that's what some of these politicians need to do, or some of these leaders. They need to walk into these areas, find out what's happening. Okay, I had a criminologist on was talking about, that the north and that side there's a lot of, violence, a lot of, young youth committing crimes and stuff. Yep. Okay, send the politicians out, send the leaders out, let them see what we need to fix. How do we resolve this issue? How do we tackle it?
They go out for a photo. I mean, one of the things that amazes me is that I go to a lot of multicultural functions and absolutely love them. And, when I go, I stay the night. I'm with the group. I am just bemused, but also just so annoyed that politicians come to those events. One of the parties in particular, they clearly tell their people, you don't have to stay. Those people go in, the politician arrives, the politician insists on speaking first, goes up, makes their speech from prepared notes, and very often walks from the from the rostrum to the front door and leaves. Telling people what they want to tell people, not listening, not watching, not investigating, not trying to understand what the issues are. And as you said, you've got so many different issues, and the politicians don't go out and look at those issues and spend time on those issues. They simply go out for a photo opportunity.
Yeah.
And usually to issue a press release of what they think without listening to what they need to listen to from the people who are actually experiencing these issues, whether it be the housing crisis, whether it be, crime, whether the impact of crime, whatever it is, whether it is the failures of the health system. And, we do have one of the best health systems in the world. I mean, if you're going to get really crook, you'd rather be in Australia
Without a doubt.
than in most other countries around the world.
Incredible.
There are not many countries around the world where you would sort of tick off and say, oh, yeah, I'd rather be there than Australia. But at the same time, we can do so much better.
So much better. Supporting, investing more money to these places, into doctors, to help them push, to get more nurses, more doctors on board, and to have less pressure. You know, but we, like I said from the beginning, incredible country, but there's so many problems that we need to tackle. You know, this is a country that we're forever grateful for. And anyone that thinks otherwise hasn't seen the outside world, because it's madness.
Exactly.
It's madness.
Exactly. And, we constrain the number of doctors that we train. And the medical profession itself, tries to keep a very limited number of people coming through in terms of training for medicine. The result of that is that we then end up having to bring in doctors from other countries. In the Victorian health system, we've got over 200 Pakistani doctors.
It's a lot of doctors, yeah.
That's just Pakistani doctors. We've also got Iranian doctors, we've got Indian doctors, we've got Chinese doctors, we've got Malaysian doctors.
Because we don't have enough here.
Yeah. If you took all of them out of the system collapses.
Very quickly. Very quickly. And then it goes back to what we said, more investments into facilities.
Yeah.
More investments into pushing students into the right direction. As I did a bit of research last time and realised that the education system, universities are only still alive because of international students.
Yep.
We are on a decline.
Yep.
With Australian students here, on a decline in universities. Why are we understanding what is the reason?
Yeah.
But then there's multiple. The disconnection, it's a massive topic to understand why we're feeling disconnected from university. Why don't students want to go there? What is the reason?
I think in some cases the students are concerned that they're going to invest a lot of their time, effort, and indeed money chasing a degree that might not guarantee them a job at all.
Do you think it's a good idea to waive? Do you think education should be free? Because I heard something a while back that it used to be university, and then they changed it.
Yeah, well, they basically went to a universal opportunity for university entrance, and that was a good thing in a lot of ways because, there were so many families where the first person of a family who ever went to university didn't go until the 1970s or 1980s or even 1990s, So certainly university education was opened up by federal government policies, particularly from the Whitlam government. But, it has created an enormous cost in terms of providing all those university places. And so the government has, over a period of time, have tried to encourage people to contribute to their own education cost. And obviously the HECS debt is really what that's all about. I think that there is a problem when you actually tax your best and brightest. I think one of the reasons why, again, young people have difficulty in getting into the housing market is because they've got a HECS debt. And, if they are able to actually earn a reasonable amount of money that might have leveraged them into the housing market, they're basically seeing a fair bit of that money go back, recouped by the government in terms of HECS debt. So, yeah, I think that there is a problem when you do that, but it's a difficult one to solve. I'm not sure that you can be totally free because that's an extraordinary cost. And, I guess one of the real issues, and the government does try to do this, is to look at different fee levels, if you like, for different courses, and in some cases tries to lower fees in areas where we need more people, more skill. But going back, you're absolutely right that, overseas students have basically kept universities afloat.
Yeah.
And in Victoria, education is, up there as one of the top export industries that we have.
It's very, very, sad to see a lot of these issues occur in Australia. Like I said in the beginning, I love this country, what it's done for my family, for myself, and all the loved ones around us. I'll die for this country, for the soul of this country. But we really need to start looking into the real issues. And I think we cannot do it as humans. We need the leaders to really listen to the community. Start going out in these certain areas, go out to these tough environments that all this crime happen, and then just talk and investigate and see what we can do. How do we change certain things and help people? Because at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. Help, ask questions, and see, each other rise.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, we need people to be looking at opportunities for us to come together rather than looking at opportunities to basically criticise and put people down.
Yeah, and create division.
Yeah,
we need to come together, because when we are together, we are unstoppable.
Right. Exactly right.
It's better to be 20 million or 26 million together than to be 1 million here, 2 million here, 3 million, and just separated. There's no need when we can just be one team and be a powerful country, as we should be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. And, yes, our leaders do need to, in some cases, some people need to stay in their own lane, do what they're best at, focus on the issues that they need to focus on. I mean, we get it in local government, where some of the local government people tend to think that they're members of the federal parliament, and they get involved in issues that they have nothing to do with, but neglect the things that they're supposed to be responsible for.
Correct.
And we have, at a state and federal level, politicians ought to be looking at opportunities to actually work together on some of these issues. And at least, one of the interesting things is in politics is that if you ask politicians about what they liked most about their time in service, they tend to nominate the times when they worked on all-party parliamentary committees. In other words, when they worked with government and opposition members and perhaps independents and so forth, or third parties, were all on the same committee working on a particular problem. And they found that the best time of their experience in Parliament, because it was collaborative, because it was, I guess, the spotlights weren't on. They didn't have to perform. They were able to actually sit down and discuss issues and find that they actually had a lot of common ground. And the research that they did with communities, where they did listen to people about issues like problems in aged care, or problems in mental health, or problems in childcare, when they actually sat together and understood those issues, not filtered by bureaucrats, but actually listened themselves, they found that the most fulfilling part of their careers in politics, and some of the better policies have come out of that.
And that's what we need more of.
Exactly.
That's what we need more of. And I hope we can all come together, understand, ask questions, and grow and evolve. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Bruce, to have you on today. I think we've touched on very important topics, and it's an absolute honor to have you on, and you've given me your time to be here. And if you would like to leave a message to the world, from Bruce to the world, what would it be?
Invest more time in other people, in listening to other people, in trying to understand their perspectives, in appreciating what they bring to your life and how they help you grow by you understanding a little bit, taking a little bit of their knowledge, their perspective, their talent, and taking that to your own heart.
And use it as a benefit.
Using it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Bruce, for being on today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.